I'm gonna need to crunch a little bit, but I brought those tulips that I just cleaned off outdoors inside. Now I'm going to rubber band them up and wrap them in a paper sleeve. Tulips really like to stretch and grow towards the light, so I want to make sure the paper is there to keep them growing in the right direction. And once I get them in water, I'll toss them in a cool, dark space until I'm ready for arranging. Here I'm just lining up the bottoms of the stems as best I can. I'm going to give them a fresh cut before I pop them into my bucket of water. And I want to make sure I'm losing as little of the stem as possible to keep my stem length as long as I can. The first thing I do before I actually lay out my flowers and get to making my recipe and the bouquets themselves is cut out my paper wrapping. I like to have these prepared ahead of time, but I've had a ton of pop-ups this season, so I need to make some for this final batch. All of my bouquets from the flower farm come in a brown paper sleeve. I've messed with the pre-made sleeves in the past, but I find the ones I make are the best fit. I cut out the piece of paper into a relatively good-sized rectangle, and then I simply fold it a little bit skewed. So once it's folded, it looks a little bit like this. After I get all of these folded, I use this stamp that I had made locally here in Wisconsin, and I stamp every single wrapping. So we are going to make about 20 of these, since I'm going to be making about 20 bouquets for a little pop-up this weekend. We have a massive storm rolling through, so it's relatively gloomy. I don't know how much more daylight we'll be able to use here today, but we're going to try to make it work. Once I have all of my tulip stems or flower product laid out in front of me, I go through and I double check my stem counts for each variety. I have a general sense of how many blooms I have for each different variety here as I'm preparing them, but I like to get pretty exact at this stage. Once I know the different variety stem counts, I add those all together to get my total. So the total number of stems sitting on the work table in front of me. Once I have that number, I like to think about how many stems I want in a bouquet. Today I'm just making a very standard market tulip bouquet, and I do about 10 tulips per bouquet for those. So I'm going to take my total number of stems and divide it by 10 to figure out exactly how many bouquets I should be making. So for example, if I have 220 stems here, I'm going to divide that by 10, and that lets me know that I can make 22 bouquets. I then go back through each individual variety stem count, and I divide that by 22. So for example, I have about 22 Katinka blooms here. That means I can put one stem of Katinka in a bouquet. I have about 44 green wave tulips here. If I divide that by 22, that means I can put about 2 green waves in every bouquet. I do this for all of the varieties. Now the reason I like to follow a recipe is everyone's bouquet is going to be relatively equal. That means the people who get to the market first thing in the morning are not going to have a different quality bouquet than the people who are coming a little bit later in the evening. It also makes for a really beautiful display where all of the bouquets are relatively mirrors of one another, and it just really looks amazing in mass like that. So let's stop the math and stop the talking, and we'll actually go along the assembly line here making a bouquet. I'll be picking up those exact recipe numbers all the way down the table. I will then rubber band it, wrap it up in my paper sleeve, tape that sleeve up, and then toss it in the buckets behind me.